Ottawa and joins us this morning. Good morning, Raywat.
Good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
So the health minister is saying, we can't rule out that we won't make mandatory vaccines for healthcare workers. Essentially, I guess, why haven't we moved towards that more quickly? It seems like there's been a lot of voices saying that that would be a good idea. Where do you see as kind of the stumbling blocks?
Well, throughout the entire pandemic, the stumbling block has been political will and public compliance and acceptance of what needs to be done. So it's an obvious thing. If anyone needs a vaccine mandate, you'd think it would be healthcare workers. But of course, we have labor union issues. We have pushback from a small but vocal minority of healthcare workers who are hesitant around the science, and that doesn't fill the rest of the population with confidence. That's the problem, right? So it'll get there eventually, I think, as we have for other vaccines.
I think part of the political will too, and I know you see it on social media, we see it on the text board and on social media as well, is some of that backlash. We could say the politicians are afraid of something, right? So how do you get the public back on side with vaccine mandates and the like?
Well, first of all, the public is on side. The overwhelming majority of the public does support this approach. It's, again, a
Right.
vocal minority. So I don't know. If I knew the answer, I'd have a Nobel Prize, and I don't. But I'd like one, though. If you've got one for me, I'll take it. But
Yeah.
I think what we need to do really is to double down on education. It's an easy thing for me to say, but I don't see any way around that. And unfortunately, that's a long-term strategy. We can't fix this election cycle. We have to reinvest in public education around science literacy and risk tolerance.
Definitely, and I know we've chatted about that in the past as well. I see, YouTube last week, the late last week, kind of cracking down on misinformation in terms of vaccines. Do you see that as a way kind of helping us with our numbers here, or do you think it'll actually help?
I think it'll help in the short term. There may be a longer term price. If you constrain messaging, then if you squeeze a thing too hard, then bits fall out of your hand, and you're going to lose some people who see this as an authoritarian overstep. That may have a longer societal price down the road. I think it's probably the right thing to do in the short term, but we need strategies to roll back that kind of restriction in the coming months and to win back people on side. So there's a larger conversation that needs to be had about what constitutes proper information, what constitutes responsible usage of communication platforms. We never had that conversation. And in the 21st century, with instantaneous communication, democratization of such platforms, it's way overdue.
And just in terms of I guess, the will and the power that you were talking about that we have given the minority, I guess, do you see a way to get that voice quieter, I guess? I've heard, you're not the first person, right? Like, I've heard 20% of the people are running 80% of the show here. So it's just kind of interesting. How do you switch the power, I guess?
I think media has a big role to play in this. So, the way we cover the anti-vax, anti-mask demonstrations/riots have to change. It's not all voices are equal. And I think when that game stops being played, we'll see the true weight across the balance beam. So I don't want to blame journalists, because journalists have done a spectacular job during this pandemic, a courageous job. But media has to take a look at itself and understand exactly what role they have played in exacerbating some of these disproportionate amplification of inappropriate voices. But as well, we so-called experts need to step in as well and respond rapidly and more authoritatively when misinformation is conveyed. That's a difficult thing. So I think the state has to have a role to play in providing sufficient resources to shout back with sufficient evidence-based messaging. That hasn't happened yet.
I hope you have so-called expert on your business card.
Next to master of time, space, and dimension.
Yeah. I saw a tweet yesterday from John Paul McGrath at TVO, just talking about, it was a graph of the vaccination uptake in Ontario. We had a huge uptake after the vaccination passport was announced, but we're starting to see that decline and wane now. Do you think that we will get to herd immunity before the end of 2021?
No. That's pretty clear.
Next question.
Right, but understand this. So the vaccine passports The intention of the vaccine passport was multifold. One is to encourage vaccine uptake. Two is to keep the unvaccinated out of super spreading environments. So two is still working. Number one was always going to plateau out once it targeted the apathetic, because the unvaccinated are a diverse and heterogeneous group that include the apathetic, that include hardcore anti-vaxxers, that include vaccine hesitant. So it's mostly the apathetic that seems to work again. So it's not surprising that that's being saturated and maxed out. We need additional tools now to cajole the remaining 20% of Ontarians to get vaccinated. But we'll need upwards of 91 higher percent of the total population to be immune before we can start having the herd immunity conversation, if indeed herd immunity is still possible. That means children have to be vaccinated, and that's not going to happen at least until November at the earliest. So we're looking at 2022 before we start having that conversation in earnest.
Yeah, and variants always possible as well to kind of put that to put that to an end, I guess. But I just also wanted to ask you about this weekend. I know here in Ontario we've been pretty steady as she goes. It's been okay in terms of COVID-19 cases when we look to Alberta for comparison as well, Saskatchewan, other prairie provinces as well. So just with that in mind, do you see any concern at all about Thanksgiving gatherings this weekend possibly causing a spike in cases, or do you think we're at a spot now with our vaccination rates that we should be okay?
I think there'll be a little bit of a bump. I don't think it'll be too bad. I have stupid faith in the public. I shouldn't have faith in the public, but I have faith in the public to be mostly responsible. And the gatherings that will happen will be mostly amongst vaccinated people. And when the unvaccinated do gather, they will be in homes and won't bleed over into bars and restaurants because they're not permitted because of vaccine passports. So the ability of transmission to penetrate deeply into society has been blunted by the high amounts of immunity we have in the population. It's not perfect though, but it's been blunted. So I think we will see a bump. Whether or not that bump manifests as a challenge to the healthcare system, I cannot say.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see, of course. Raywat Deonandan, thanks so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.